Hello, welcome back everybody to the second day of Imagining Abolition. I apologize, I just found that I was muted and I've been talking, so my apologies. Welcome back to the second day of our Imagining Abolition conference. You're in for a treat this morning with this session. The title of the session is Fostering a Transformative Justice Practice for Yourself. My name is Sandra Joy. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a member of the event organizing team and the moderator for this session. I want to make you aware that closed captioning is available. To view a live transcription, click the live transcript button on the bottom menu and select show subtitle. Also, in order to secure the space, you cannot rename yourself once you have entered. We're sorry if you are unable to add your pronouns to your name already, but we urge you to do so before you log into the next session. In dreaming of this event, our team was inspired by the words adapted from Project NIA. Abolitionist futures are not compatible with white supremacy, settler colonialism, misogyny, heterosexism, transphobia, ableism, and classism. Yet these symptoms of oppression are all around us and affect even this event space. The hope our team has for this session is that organizers, presenters, and participants, particularly those of us who carry a lot of privilege, are mindful of the differential impacts of power and have the courage to hold to account anyone here who exercises power in ways that enact harm. If one of our organizers removes you from this session, our intention is not to punish nor to exclude you, but to practice care for the abolitionist community that we are building. So without further ado, I would like to first off encourage all to post reflections about the conference to hashtag Imagining Abolition 2021, which I will put in the chat momentarily. And I would also like to move to introduce our wonderful presenters this morning. Again, the title is Fostering a Transformative Justice Practice for Yourself. And we have two wonderful presenters here, Nishma, Jethwa, and Deepika, Bhardwaj. All right, let me give you a little bit of information about them as I introduce them, and then I will turn it over to these wonderful presenters. Nishma is a facilitator, educator, and activist who's been organizing across social justice issues for the last 10 years. She's originally from London with roots and community in Gujarat and Mumbai. Most recently, Nishma has been working within movements to lead and support organizational and community development, build and deliver curricula rooted in feminist and anti-oppression practice, and frame programs to advance gender justice, labor rights, and feminist tech. She has a background in law with an interest in critically looking at punitive and individualistic approaches to harm, conflict, and abuse. Nishma is a co-organizer at Alternative Justice. Welcome, Nishma. Deepika is a New Delhi-based queer and feminist organizer with a background in gender studies. She's interested in transformative justice and anti-violence work rooted in abolitionist praxis and focused on building meaningful and accountable relationships within our communities. Deepika initiated Alternative Justice in 2020 with an aim to reconceptualize justice as restorative and transformative, critically analyze punitive and individualistic approaches to sexual harm, and to build alternative strategies to address violence in our communities. She also supports pedagogy, research, and content development for an organization that works towards preventing child sex abuse. We're very excited to have these two presenters with us today. So Nishma and Deepika, I'd like to turn it over to you. They will give direction as how they'd like for you to participate in this highly interactive workshop. Thank you both.
Thank you, Sandy. I hope everyone can hear me. All right, great. So before we begin, first of all, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining, taking time to come be with us in this space. Just want to highlight some housekeeping rules. This is going to be a fairly participatory workshop, so we'll be inviting you all to take part in activities, discuss things in breakout, and do some exercises on your own as well. Sandy has already informed you about the live transcript, so we also invite you to speak slowly and not speak over one another, so the captioning can keep up. We're incredibly sorry we have been unable to provide sign language interpretation for our session. The way that we see you all participate is you're welcome to use the chat box when we invite you to speak. so that we know and can unmute you. You're also welcome to use the hand up or emojis as much as you like. We encourage and welcome participation in all its forms. So I would like to begin by introducing you very quickly to who we are. Sandy's already introduced us individually, but I want to tell you about the platform that we run, which is called Alternative Justice, which is a space where we're trying to build community-based anti-carceral and feminist interventions to sexual violence, abuse, and conflict in India, where currently no such alternative redressal mechanism exists for survivors, and where our response to this kind of violence is still deeply invested in the carceral process. So we're trying to very consciously move away from punitive and individualistic approaches to sexual harm and abuse and look into building alternative strategies outside of the criminal legal system. We really value learning and building knowledge collectively and moving from a space of curiosity, which can also accommodate mistakes and errors, because we feel it is through our collective efforts that it is possible to create spaces for introspection, for moving through conflict, for taking accountability, for building strategies, and eventually intervening when harm occurs in our community. So Sandy's already introduced me. I would not like to add anything more to that. Want to invite Nishma if there's anything that you want to say at this point. Introduce yourself.
Hi, no, I'll just say hi and thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. Yeah, my name's Nishma, my pronouns are she, they. I'm an Indian woman with longish curly black hair and brown eyes, and I'm just sitting in my bedroom, so there's a bed behind me. Yeah, I think that's all I want to say for now. Before I pass it back to Deepika, I would actually like to spend a minute on community agreements for today's session, because like Deepika said, and like Sandy said, it's quite a participatory session. So we're going to be asking you to speak to us, speak to each other, do a couple of activities. And I think keeping that in mind, we just want to ensure that the space is as much yours as it is ours, and that we all feel able to show up fully, especially because of the conversations we'll be having. So I think Deepika is going to share a link in the chat to a Jamboard where we've shared some of the agreements we've already thought about for today's session. So if you'd like to open the link and just have a look at that, take a minute to just look over the agreements that we've been thinking about, and feel free to add any that you think are missing that you want to bring into the room today. You can just click the icon on the left-hand side, I think it's the little post-it icon, and type out anything onto a post-it that you think we've missed out or that you would like us to think about and adhere to as we move forward. As you do that, I just want to highlight a couple of the agreements that we think are quite important. So this is, as we all know from previous sessions yesterday as well, not a space to be shamed or to shame anyone. And we hope to show up with care and respect and empathy. We assume good intentions to begin with and inquire accordingly, but of course allow for disagreement and speaking truth to power. I found it quite helpful to see these framed as or think about it in the context of the fact that we need each other to end violence and no one is disposable, just to ground those community agreements within our overarching purpose, which helps to inform our practice, which is what today is all about, or what our session is all about, but also to keep in mind our positionality, privilege, and identities when we are contributing, which we'll touch upon a little bit more later on as well. And in keeping with the fact that today is quite participatory, we just want to say that there are no experts here. We consider us all, everyone in this room, to be teachers and to be students. So please feel free to share your knowledge and suggestions as we go. You're very welcome to put your hand up and we'll get you unmuted so you can speak. Or if the chat is easier, you can put your thoughts in the chat and we'll try and keep an eye on it. This is by no means a lecture, and it's not going to be structured that way. So just to keep that in mind, we are going to try our very best to pause and create space for dialogue and questions and comments and kind of work through this together, but obviously being mindful that we have limited time, and the way that it's kind of structured does have some restrictions around that. And finally, I just wanted to say that please take what works for you and leave behind the rest. Do what you need to take care of yourself, whether that's stepping out for a moment, whether you like to draw while you're listening or write, or if you need to keep your camera off. Of course, we would love to see you, but we understand if you'd prefer to keep your cameras off as well. There are a couple of other community agreements on there as well, so feel free to read those and add your own. That's absolutely fine. I will pass back to Deepika now. Thank you.
Thank you, Nishma. So let's start with a round of introductions. Since there are a lot of us here, please use the chat box. I think the intention is to familiarize ourselves with who we're sharing this space with. So we'd like to know who all is here with us today and want to ask each of you to share your name, how you're showing up today, or what has your attention. Anything you'd like us to know to help us know you better. This could be your pronouns, your access needs, anything you want to share. Nishma has already pasted that. I'll give you a few moments to just use the chat box to introduce yourself to us.
Yeah, sure. So while you're typing, well, you already know my name and my pronouns. I'm showing up a little bit tired today because, as I was saying to the organizers earlier, I tried to stay up for the sessions last night, and I'm in the UK, so I'm in a different time zone. So I tried my best, but I fell asleep waiting for a couple of sessions I really wanted to attend. So I feel not very well rested, but I feel like it was for a good reason. So I'm a little bit tired, so please bear with me. I'm also a little nervous because there are quite a lot of people, more people than I would usually do such a participatory workshop with, but I'm excited and really looking forward to hearing from everyone. So I hope that we get to do that. And I think that's it from my side. I can see that people are responding. Hi.
Thank you, Nishma. Thank you, everyone who's sharing in the chat box. So I want to start by setting a little context today for our workshop, which is on fostering a transformative justice practice for ourselves. Because a lot of abolitionist and TJ work is based in the community, we are very conscious of what a community means for us and try as much to stay away from invoking community in a very idealized, romanticized, or even fetishized sense. Since we're based in India, where the caste system is the overarching system of discrimination and oppression, and where social relations are maintained by caste patriarchy, this kind of invocation of community can be quite counterproductive. And while I said initially that currently no community-based redressal mechanisms exist for survivors in India, it's important to acknowledge that marginalized communities like the Dalit, Bahujan, Adivasi communities in India have always had to rely on themselves and continue to rely on themselves in the face of violence that occurs within their community. So as we move through this workshop today, we want us all to sort of think critically about our positionality a bit. My caste location enables me to exercise certain privileges, and so it is imperative for me, as I'm sure to my co-organizer Nishma as well, to embed our conversation today in the lived realities of various communities that do not enjoy those privileges. So our intention today is to collaboratively discuss what reimagining systems of justice can look like when they center the voices of those survivors of violence who are marginalized by different social identities. I now want to invite Nishma to speak a little more about the workshop that we'll be doing today.
Thank you, Deepika. I just wanted to acknowledge what everyone is sharing in the chat, and thank you so much for turning up, despite there being a lot of kind of heaviness around various things in our various communities and where we're located. So I really appreciate that, and I hear you. So yeah, talking about today, in the context that Deepika has provided, we actually proposed today's workshop because Deepika and I, for some time now, have been grappling with trying to understand what it would look like for survivors to have access to community-based processes that support our own healing, allow us to seek tangible accountability from those who act abusively, and also create conditions that cultivate real transformation in our communities. And what we've learned kind of through our, what I call experiments, is that working towards abolition really can't start at the point of violence, and it must be fostered much, much earlier in our relational practices, in how we support ourselves in conflict in order to be generative, in how we build trust and interconnectedness. And so for us, this has meant kind of experimenting with and building up our own abilities first, using a range of personal and community practices. And that's kind of what we wanted to share with you all today, and kind of co-create in a way. So at this point, I do want to note that we did not come up with these practices. They are not new, nor are they ours to claim ownership over. We are so grateful to all of those who come before us, who have worked to cultivate community, who share their journeys, their successes, their failures, who have come up with the tools for us to draw upon today. And we're particularly grateful for, and I guess are bringing into this room with us, many other practitioners who have conceptualized through their own work in different, very different socio-political contexts to us, the practices that we will be exploring today. And we really wish to acknowledge these histories as well. And in particular, we would like to name the often unacknowledged work of Black and queer communities, communities of color, caste oppressed and other marginalized communities, as Deepika mentioned earlier. And yeah, so the remainder of today's session with us is going to be basically quite participatory and also quite personal. And we hope that by the end of this workshop, you have started to create, I guess, your own toolkit for fostering a transformative justice practice, really being able to outline some of the practical ways you might want to address interpersonal harm and conflict in your own communities. And we'll be thinking in particular about what we can do at the inter and intrapersonal levels to build the foundations for better community accountability, with the objective of exploring what it might look like to move away from hierarchically structured systems and oppressive systems, and imagine growing new roots which are based in liberation and safety and relationship. Hopefully we'll also have time to share what has worked for us so far, any ways that we've failed or fumbled, and how we can build upon that together. So yeah, we'll be taking you through a series of activities, as many as we can in the time that we have. And we'll do some of these together, some of them in smaller breakouts and some of them individually. I know we've repeated that a few times, but I hate when I go to workshops and I don't know that I'm going to be thrown into a breakout room with someone or with a couple of people. So we just wanted to let you all know, so you have a chance to let that settle before you get there. I do recommend that you grab pens and paper or a journal if that's the way that you like to build your tools and your toolkit, so you can start sort of being more creative in how you pull together some of the information and the knowledge from today. Maybe you want to draw, maybe you like to do diagrams, and we welcome all of that. If not, then we are going to be giving you space online to do that through the Jamboard as well. And I finally just want to flag that the material could bring up unexpected feelings for you as we explore conflict and community and the ways in which we are showing up. Because there are such few spaces to talk about conflict and violence, there can be a lot that comes up when we do sort of sit down and choose to reflect on these things. So just to stay aware of that and look after yourself as we work through the session. And if you need to step away, that's of course fine. So yeah, I'm going to pass it over to Deepika to take us through our first activity.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Nishma. Let's start with familiarizing ourselves with where everyone is coming from and how fostering a transformative justice practice will be relevant for us. In particular, we want you to identify where you might want to use this mini toolkit that you're going to create. So Nishma is going to put a link to the Jamboard in the chat, if you can open that. Great. So what we want you to think about is what community means to you. Is it your family, your workplace? Is it a movement within which you organize, the building or street you live in? You can pick one of these to keep in mind as we go through today's session. And we also want you to think about what scenarios do you see yourself needing to draw on a transformative justice practice and why? We'd love to gather your thoughts so as to, each of us can think about our individual context for practice. And I invite you to note down some of your thoughts on the Jamboard. We'll just give you a few minutes to do that. Just want to invite, since there's a lot of us, it would have been really amazing if each of us got the chance to share and give a little more context on these. Want to invite 2 or 3 people if they want to share further on these 2 questions that we've asked today, on what community means to them. You can raise your hand so that we can see you, or you can say something in the chat. Also want to say, if you're creating your toolkit alongside this workshop, do remember to note down how you've defined community and examples of the scenarios you see yourself potentially being able to support. Blake says, I don't feel like I am part of any community. That's completely all right, Blake. Thank you for sharing. Cool. So I'll pass it on to Nishma to help us build on this. We'll start to think about ourselves in our own ways of being in this world. Over to you, Nishma.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So many communities people have put into this Jamboard. I really appreciate it. And I really wanted to say, I hear what you say, Blake, as well. When I was first asked this question, I was kind of like, oh, what do you mean? What do you mean by community? And then later, I think it's the nature of the word as well, and the way that what it's come to mean. I think only later I kind of realized that it could be the people I work with, or just the people that are around me, or my friendship group, or even like the 2 friends that I hang out with. So it's interesting to think about it in that way. And the reason we asked this question is because it's just something to keep in mind. It will kind of make the rest of the workshop a little bit more tangible, I guess, as you think through some of the tools and things you might want to practice as you leave the workshop. But yeah, getting into the next session. Oh, I can see I just want to see what someone said in the chat. As an older Gen Z, I find the privilege of education has allowed for me to educate others within my generation, to get their activism started and get them passionate. Thank you. I love older Gen Z. I didn't know there was an older Gen Z, so I appreciate that. So yeah, sorry, moving on to the next activity. So we found that one of the most useful tools to start with from a transformative justice perspective, or in doing transformative justice work, is really intentionally and taking time to identify our values, our principles, and the practices that go along with those values and principles, and just to understand what it is that's underlying what we're trying to do. And many TJ groups, if you've come across them previously, have used these as a way to ground their work and always come back to these values and principles. So we're going to spend a bit of time trying to identify and think about how we personally can align our actions with our values and what our values even are. And so the activity that we're about to do is adapted from a workbook called Aligning Our Actions with Our Values by Margot Feldman. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put you into smaller groups, and I can see new people joining all the time. So give me a second if I need to reassign in a second. But I'm going to put you into smaller groups where I want you to take 5 minutes, about 5 minutes, to just on your own journal, and then you have the rest of the 10 minutes or so to discuss together as a group. So if you go to the next page on the Jamboard link, or if you don't know how to do that, well, if you go look at the top of the page, there's a little arrow, you can click that and you'll get to the next page. But if you don't know, Deepika has posted it into the chat as well. You'll see a list to help you to start thinking through and articulate your own values in this work. So what I'd like you to do is identify at least 3 values that resonate with you and note them down. We're just going to do 3. There might be more, but we're just going to do 3 because of the time. And if there's something that's not on this list, feel free to add that in. It's no problem. These are just to help you start thinking. Once you've identified your values, I want you to consider how you think you might put them into practice. So it might be useful to think about some of the questions that I've noted at the bottom there for you on the Jamboard. So which actions really align with these values and which specifically don't, whether these are actions that you currently do, that you've done in the past, that you've seen others doing, which ones really align with this one value that you've identified and which ones don't align, and you probably want to think deeply about that. What do you do to ground yourself in your values when in conflict? What does that look like? What does it mean practically, right? It's really easy to say, oh, one of my values is honesty, but what does that really mean when you're in the middle of a conflict, for example, when you're experiencing conflict, when you're supporting someone with conflict? And finally, what small actions affirm your connections with your values? So on a day-to-day basis, what are some of the things that maybe help you remember to practice your values, or ground you in your values when you're maybe having a difficult time or a joyful time? What does that look like? So it's not, we don't have so much time. So I suggest that you kind of just make some quick notes while you journal for about 5 minutes, and then make sure you have a chat with your group. Don't worry if you can't get through all of it. I just want you to sort of start talking with each other and get comfortable in that as well. So I'm opening the rooms now. You'll have about 15 minutes. We're just doing an activity where we identify 3 values that resonate with us, and then thinking about how we would practice those in reality, or how we do practice those. People are in breakout, so you get about 5 minutes to just journal on your own, and then the rest of the time to discuss what you've done together.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Okay, I think everyone's back now. Thank you so much. Sorry to the people who were inevitably cut off halfway through their conversations. I apologize. And thank you for those of you that stayed. I know that you don't know each other, and it can be really jarring to be put into a room and have a discussion about values of all things with a stranger. So thank you so much for staying. Yeah, so this was essentially a taster into building the first part of this toolkit around fostering a TJ practice for yourself. And remember that there's much more that can be done around this in terms of thinking about your values, thinking about how you apply, and practicing what that could look like as well. So it's by no means an exhaustive exploration of how we might do this. But before we move on, I would love to hear from anyone that wants to feedback about how that was, or about what you discussed, anything that was surprising or interesting that came up. But thank you, Marie. I can see Marina shared that this exercise was great. I really enjoyed talking to my breakout room partners. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. One of the things that came up for me, I'm Abby, I use she, her pronouns, is looking over the list are values that I wish I could have or like better foster. So I'm not a very patient person, and that's one of the skills or values that I wish I could do better. So thinking about how I can also include that in the values that I should be working on that I wish that I had.
I love that. Thank you so much, Abby. I think that's so interesting that you say that, because I think sometimes we think about these values as these kind of high aspirations that we just don't embody. But actually, when we start, and we only had a little bit of time today, but when we start thinking about actually what could this look like in practice, right? Like, what are the small ways I could maybe show up with patients in my home, or with a friend, or in a conflict, for example. That's when we can dig down into what it really means to live by our values, and then therefore how we can build this TJ practice, right? So thank you so much for sharing. I saw in the chat that I think it was a direct message, but Manojini wanted to share, if we can perhaps unmute her. Carrie sharing, I love getting to hear pieces of other people's stories, and great to be able to connect and know we are building broader interdependent communities. Absolutely. It was nice to see, Subi, it was nice to see similarities in gut reactions and worries. It's not just me. We can work on these things together. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Manojini, and I use she, her, they pronouns. And I just wanted to share, like, it is really hard. It's so hard. It's really hard talking about this because, like, it's first of all, like, there's such an international group. Like, it's like hard even for family members to talk with family members. And this, I think, having a space like this it really pushes you, like it's not pushed you before. Um, and I felt safe. I felt safe also. But yeah, it's still hard. It just surprises me how hard it is. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Monogamy. Yeah, absolutely. I think we're so grateful for you all showing up in this way and kind of moving through today's workshop quite bravely. So thank you. Yeah, Subi, thank you for your comment. Roses, thank you for your comment. Really practical way to work with values. In my experience, discussing them in groups can seem so abstract, so the list and questions were valuable. Also helped me think about which practices I find hard and need to work on, like Abby said. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I think I'll leave it at that, and I'll pass it on to Deepika to take us into our next activity around accountability and taking accountability and what that could look like.
Thank you. Thanks, Nishma. So let's move on to thinking about accountability, specifically self-accountability, and what that might look like for us individually. We think of accountability as a process, not an equation. So while we might explore tools for accountability right now, that is not to say if you tick all of these things, you have somehow achieved accountability in a given situation. We will move from a space of acknowledgement that we are all capable of and have very likely caused harm. We're all in some sense grounded in the same system we are committed to opposing, as Anne Rousseau writes, and therefore need to explore accountability with that knowledge. So what can be some obstacles to accountability? It is important to place accountability within the framework of structural oppression and inequality. Not all of us are privileged with societal power, and systems of oppression ensure that power doesn't rest with those inhabiting marginalized identities. And so any conversation on accountability will have to involve understanding the many ways in which structural identities generate violence, and as a result, complicate our abilities to take accountability. So what we're really trying to reflect on today is how do we define accountability for ourselves in a way that our actions are aligned with our values and those of our community. Today, since we're not really necessarily with our communities, we will explore self-accountability, but we will keep our communities as we defined earlier in mind. So often when we try to take accountability, we go to 0, which is no accountability, to or 100, which is a shame spiral. Going to 100 can obscure our ability to take accountability as it puts the focus on us rather than our actions. So how can we find a middle point that works? We're going to do now a short self-journaling exercise. We've adopted this from the Creative Interventions Toolkit, which is really, really helpful, and I'm so grateful that it exists. Let's start by thinking about, firstly, what are 2 or 3 things that I do currently or in the past during stress or conflict that people or my community find challenging or that are challenging to the situation overall. Nishma is already or is about to paste the questions. Yeah. And the second thing we're going to think about is what are 2 things I'd like us to commit to as bottom lines, or how we behave towards each other during future situations of stress and conflict. I'll give you a few minutes to journal, to note down on your notepads or your laptops, or just to think about. Is anyone ready to share anything that they want to share for any of the 2 questions? I invite you to share or just add them to the chat box. But I would love to hear some of your reflections on this. Marina says, get angry, get defensive, engage in behaviors with myself that aren't healthy. Pause, be patient, take time to reflect on our actions and emotions, take time to get perspective on the situation from other people who can help us see things more objectively. Thank you. I resonate with both of those. I think I've always also found it really helpful to just breathe. Especially in the context like we've been talking about caste, and we've recently noticed a lot of conversations on social media where just public calls to hold certain people accountable, certain privileged people accountable who enjoy certain privilege, is always met with a sort of defensiveness, which makes people from marginalized communities really frustrated. Like that anger and frustration is really structural. And to really think about these reactions has been really important, even for my own reflections and introspection, where it's always better to sort of sit with that discomfort to reflect. And that's when my values really come into play. I think the exercise even today is going to be really useful for all of us to always align our actions with our values. Elaine says, pause and reflect before responding, catch an attitude and act petty. I resonate with that as well. Respect humanity no matter what is the response. Thank you. Anyone who would like to unmute themselves and share? I think
Yeah.
Manogni, yeah, go ahead, Manogni.
So I think what I do during this is hard to share, but I think I'll just do it. So 2, 3 things. Okay, what like in my family, I think, and this happens with my friends as well. There's this enmeshment. Like you cannot be sad. You cannot be not happy, because you always have to be happy, because if you're not happy, then it just brings up a lot of things unsaid, especially with my family, because if you're like, they always expect me not to be sad. And I have also internalized that. And instead of holding space to be sad, I get competitive. I just get really defensive, which is like a universal theme, I think. So I would like to hold space for me to be sad, and it's okay to be sad. Yeah.
Thank you, Manogni. Thank you for sharing so vulnerably. And thank you for sharing space with us. Alana says, fond response where I'll apologize right away, even if I don't understand or agree, and it doesn't let the conversation go anywhere because I become focused on making sure someone isn't mad at me. And the response to the second one is, don't react immediately, use emotional regulation skills so I can become more clear-headed before I respond, communicating and taking space if I feel responding won't be productive right now. Thank you. That's really amazing. Thank you for articulating it like that. Thank you so much. Great. So we'll move ahead. So the first two questions that we just reflected on now tie into the next sort of reflection. So we want to think about what are some ways to support accountability after folks or systems do harm without engaging criminal and legal systems. We'll just give you a minute to think about this a little more and invite reflections. Great. So inviting anyone who wants to share at this point. This question is also really important for us because I feel like at Alternative Justice, Nishma and I have been thinking about this, and the sort of work we want to put into this has to be done collectively, is a collaborative process. We also hold a community of practice. We're going to begin that in a few weeks. The intention is to do this work collectively. The intention is to hear what strategies have worked for other people, and to really center voices of diverse experiences, people from diverse communities. So would love if anyone wants to share. I think Marina's raised her hand. Let's will unmute you.
Thank you. I would say, I feel like one of the most important things here is being preemptive, working on building connection and support among members of a community beforehand so that these situations arise less often, and when they do, it can be easier to resolve them. And then asking people what they need and helping them get those needs met depending on what resources are available, and creating space for people to safely communicate their emotions are a few things.
Thank you. That's super helpful, Marina. So I think since we have about 20 minutes left, we should quickly move on to our last activity for the workshop, and I'll pass it to Nishma.
Thank you. Sorry, I was just typing in the chat. Thank you. So just a reminder, I was just typing in the chat that if you are creating your toolkit, then feel free to note these things down. This is being recorded as well, so you can always come back to it. And we're also going to keep the Jamboard open for you all to access whenever you like. So if you're trying to collect sort of strategies and tools for yourself, then please feel free to do that. Even if you're not sharing in the group, that's absolutely fine. So the final activity, like all the others, is just kind of dipping our toes into thinking about addressing conflict and our role in that space, as we work towards fostering this transformative justice practice for ourselves. So we're going to go back into our breakouts for a final discussion. The goal of the discussion is to start imagining developing small scale interventions and thinking about what that could look like for us. So the activity is adapted from Project NIA's Transformative Justice curriculum, if you've come across that. In your breakouts, we want you to choose an experience where one of you has witnessed a conflict of some sort and wished you had an effective intervention at the time. For the purposes of today, try to choose something low on the trauma scale, so we're not re-traumatizing ourselves. We don't have as much space and time as we would like. So try to pick something a little bit lighter if that's possible. And also so that you can think of really concrete interventions with respect to that conflict as well, to make it more realistic and actually possible that you would take this forward. So once one of you has been able to share and you've chosen a scenario, I'd like you to go back and think about the values you just spoke about and draw on those values that you identified and just ideate a little bit and document as a group how you might support and affirm the person that was harmed or the harm that was done. Maybe both people were harmed in that situation, and how you might engage the person that was doing the harm and what that could look like. What are some of your ideas? I think Deepika is going to put into the chat box the next Jamboard page, but again, you can just click to the next page and you can record your ideas there through post-it notes. You can see that I've just done 2 little columns for you around ideas for how you might support and affirm the person harmed, ideas for how you might engage the person doing the harm. So if that's clear and you've got the link to the Jamboard open, I'm going to pop you into breakouts for probably just 7-ish minutes. So I apologize, it's not too long. I'll try and give you as long as possible, and then we'll come back and do the little closeout bits. So yeah, hope that sounds okay. Hi, everyone. I'm so sorry I had to cut you off. I know that was quite a short amount of time. I could see people were typing in the Jamboard, so please feel free to keep adding stuff over there. Also, I accidentally put Deepika in a breakout room, so whoever was with her, you are lucky to have had spent some time with her.
I'm really glad you did that.
Thank you. I'm glad. Oh, I'm really glad. So I've actually seen some really interesting things pop up on the Jamboard. We do only have 5 minutes left, so I won't read them out, but I definitely suggest having a look. There are some interesting questions and nuances that people have really drawn out, which are really interesting. But before I hand it over to Deepika to close us out, I just wanted to check, does anybody want to desperately say anything before we move on? You can put it in the chat or you can put your hand up. You're more than welcome to share at this point. If not, we will be sharing sort of our details and contacts and things like that, so we can always continue the conversation later. And I think I will hand it over to Deepika now. Thanks.
Thank you, Nishma. Really sad that we're out of time. I wish we had a lot more time for reflections. But we hope we've been able to, you've been able to start to build out your toolkit for fostering a TJ practice for yourself. We will keep access to the Jamboards open if you want to draw from any of the slides for your own toolkit later. To close us, we'd love to just hear back from you in the chat. One thing that you've taken away from today's session, or even just something you'll be exploring or thinking about further as you take your toolkit forward. It can also be just a word about how you're feeling towards the end of the session. If there are any feelings coming up for you, please feel free to share. If not, thank you so much for joining us. We're really grateful that you shared the space with us today. And for folks who joined in from India, please do apply for our community of practice if you are someone who is doing a lot of anti-violence work.
I want to thank both of you for this wonderful presentation, wonderfully interactive, where people were able to interact and get to know one another and address these very integral, important concerns about how to engage in restorative transformation. So thank you very much. I want to direct everybody to the chat box. I'm going to post a link. Once again, I think that Delphine did it at the beginning of the workshop, but just, I know we had some people join us later. The link that I just sent in is one that I encourage you to fill out to give us some feedback on the conference thus far, on the workshop today, and any other aspects of the conference. I also want to invite you, turn your attention to we're going to have a midway through a conference critique session and a conference close session as well on the last day. We want to encourage everyone to attend, to share feedback of that venue too, so we can make this even better for the next time. But thank you all. Thank you, Deepika and Nishma, very, very, for this wonderful performance and presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And I was just reading all the little comments in the chat. So it's been amazing. Thank you so much. And I agree. We were also saying that we needed much more time to do something like this, but we tried. And if you, like Deepika said, if you are in India, we do have, we are starting this community of practice, which is literally this, but longer. So please feel free to apply and get in touch. And I put the details in the chat box. So, and please feel free to reach out to us, even if you're not in India, and we can share and learn from each other. It was really good to have some really amazing people in this group, actually. So thank you.
Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of the conference. We hope to see you in another session soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.